Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The stars in Sector 99 twinkled dimly, a cold, indifferent backdrop to the vast silence of space. For years, this sector had remained under tight control, governed by the Xanthari Dominion, whose iron grip made it a region where no species dared enter. Their ships, massive and bristling with weapons, patrolled relentlessly, ensuring that no outsider would even think to cross into their territory. This wasn't just a military stronghold, it was a reminder to the galaxy of what happened to those who defied the Dominion. The stars above seemed to blink in warning, as if the very universe itself knew that breaking this quiet was about to cause a storm. And then, the impossible happened. A human warship, unmarked and perfectly still, emerged from the dark void between the two moons of the sector. It sat there, as though it had always belonged. Its sleek, angular frame cast a long shadow across the moons, reflecting a cold light off its surface, silent, ominous, and uninvited. Captain Karin Ver, standing motionless on the bridge of his flagship, the Axe of Dominion, stared at the holographic projection with wide, unblinking eyes. The sight in front of him was something he thought he would never witness. "Play it again," he hissed, his voice trembling, his four eyes narrowing in disbelief. His mandibles clicked together in frustration as his officers scrambled to make sense of the data flooding in. The scan results were clear. The object in front of them wasn't some stray asteroid or forgotten derelict. It was a human warship. The design was unmistakable. Earthforge, Mark 9, a siege carrier built for relentless warfare. The ship had no visible markings, no affiliations. It was as if it had materialized out of nowhere, with no reason or invitation to be there. "That's impossible," muttered Veer, staring at the readout. "They're not supposed to be here. Not in this sector. Not without our permission." The communications officer, a nervous-looking Xanthari with twitching antennae, could only nod in agreement, her tail flicking nervously. "They've never dared before, sir," she whispered. "They don't belong here." Veer's claws curled into tight fists, his heart hammering in his chest. This was not just a violation. It was a declaration. "Alert the fleet," he commanded. "Priority 1. I want every patrol redirected, every ship on high alert. This is an invasion, not a misunderstanding." His voice rang out across the bridge, shaking with an anger that reverberated through the metallic walls. He leaned closer to the console, his voice lowering to a growl. "They think they can just show up here, in our sector. We'll show them why they shouldn't have come." The Axe of Dominion lurched slightly as its engines roared to life. Veer didn't feel the movement, though. He was still staring at the holographic display, as if trying to will the human ship to vanish, to blink out of existence like a bad dream. But it remained there, steady and unmoving, a quiet giant among the stars. The silence in the bridge grew unbearable as his officers worked frantically to recalibrate sensors, rerun scans, and search for any explanation that could make sense of the situation. But there was none. No answer would come. This wasn't just another skirmish or a minor inconvenience. This was something much bigger, something more dangerous, and it was sitting right in front of them. "Commander!" The sensor officer's voice broke the tension, a note of fear creeping into his words. "There's something else. Something we didn't notice earlier." Veer's mind raced, his thoughts running in a frantic whirl. What could possibly be worse than what they were already facing? The Zenthari Dominion was not accustomed to surprises, and this human ship, sitting still in the cold expanse of space, was the most dangerous kind of unknown. "What do you mean?" he demanded. His voice, usually filled with authority, now sounded raw, almost desperate. The officer hesitated, his eyes flickering between the console and Veer's enraged gaze. Then, his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "There are other ships. More ships. Smaller, but they're cloaked. We didn't see them before because they're hidden." The air in the bridge seemed to freeze. Veer's chest tightened. More ships? He had known the humans could be cunning. But this was a whole different level of strategy. The human warship, the Earthforge, Mark 9, had never been designed to operate alone, not with the weight of its weapons and systems. It made sense now, as much as Veer hated to admit it. Humans never traveled without backup. "Where are they?" Veer barked. His claws tapped the side of the command chair nervously as the tension mounted. "Show me." The holographic display shifted, and a new set of data points appeared. Veer's eyes narrowed, scanning the information. Dozens of signatures blinked into existence around the human warship, each one hidden beneath a veil of cloaking technology that made them almost invisible to conventional scanning methods. Stealth frigates, a fleet of them, all lined up, positioned just out of reach, silent and waiting. Veer felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just a mission of force. It was a mission of precision. The humans weren't here to conquer or destroy everything in their path. They were here to send a message. "Prepare for engagement," Veer snarled, his tone turning from disbelief to cold, calculated fury. "We're not dealing with mere trespassers. This is an assault, and they've come to test us." The command deck erupted into action as officers scrambled to relay orders. Veer's mind raced, but there was no time for second-guessing now. The entire fleet was in motion, dozens of ships streaking toward their position, poised for an attack that would hopefully overwhelm the human warship before it could strike back. His officers, despite their training and experience, were visibly shaken. The Dominion had encountered many threats in its long history, but this was unprecedented. On the human warship, aboard the Earthforge Mark 9, Commander Riker Graves leaned back in his chair, unbothered by the frantic alerts flashing on his console. His boots rested casually on the steel surface of the command chair, the faint sound of a mug clinking against his hand as he took another sip from the chipped black mug that bore the faded logo of Earth's Terran Defense Forces. "Scared already?" he muttered to himself, his lips curling into a smirk. Riker had been in many battles before, but this was something else. The way the Dominion had responded to his presence, it was almost like they had forgotten who the humans were. He wasn't concerned. In fact, he found the entire situation somewhat amusing. "Lieutenant Sana," he called over his shoulder, his voice low but firm. "What's the status on their fleet?" Sana, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm demeanor, glanced at the sensors before turning to face him. "They've scrambled half of their defense network," she reported. "Multiple cruisers are repositioning. They've fallen into defensive formation. They think we're alone, that we're vulnerable." Riker chuckled softly. "Perfect," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "Let them think that. Let them believe they have the advantage. The humans were never here to play by the rules. not when the stakes were this high. Sana raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in his tone. So what now? She asked. We wait until they come for us? Riker didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on the viewport, watching the void of space stretch endlessly before them. His thoughts turned inward as he processed everything. The fear that was starting to take root in the Dominion's ranks. The confusion that would soon give way to chaos. He didn't come here to hide. He came here to remind the galaxy of what humanity was capable of. The Dominion had forgotten. They had long since assumed humanity was nothing but a quiet species, content to live in their own corner of the galaxy. But humanity wasn't weak. Riker knew that, and he was here to make them remember. It's time, Riker finally said, his voice low and steady. For too long, they've looked at our peace like its weakness. They've forgotten what we're capable of. But now, it's time to remind them. Sana nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. It was a risky move, but it was a necessary one. She turned back to her console, readying her systems for the inevitable fight that would come. On the axe of Dominion, Veer's claws trembled as the reports of more ships arrived. The Dominion fleet was nearly in position, but something felt wrong. The human warship hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't even moved from its original position. Yet, the tension was building. Every second felt like an eternity. Send a message immediately, Veer ordered, his voice sharp as he leaned forward in his chair. Alert them. Tell them they are trespassing on our territory. Give them 60 seconds to identify themselves before we open fire. The communications officer nodded nervously, quickly typing in the command. Veer's eyes flickered to the screen, watching as the transmission was sent, his mind racing with the possibilities of what would happen next. It was a gamble, but if the humans didn't respond, if they didn't retreat, the Dominion would have no choice but to act. Back on the Earth Forge. Mark 9, Riker watched the message come through. He raised an eyebrow, looking at the countdown with a quiet amusement. Still giving us countdowns, like we don't know what's about to happen, Riker muttered with a smirk. Sana glanced up from her terminal, her expression unreadable. Should we respond? She asked, her voice cautious. Riker shook his head, his grin widening. No need, he said. Let them sweat for a while. They've forgotten who they're dealing with. And with that, the Earth Forge, Mark 9, began to move. The Earth Forge Mark 9 drifted silently through the void, its sleek hull moving with purpose, but without urgency. There was no aggressive surge forward, no deafening thrusters, just a steady, deliberate movement toward the waiting Dominion fleet. The ship wasn't making a show of force. It was a subtle statement, a quiet reminder of power, precision, and patience. Back on the axe of Dominion, Veer's eyes widened in disbelief. He had expected the human warship to flinch, to react in some way when the warning was sent. Instead, it had done nothing. No retreat, no acknowledgement. Just this unsettling, calculated drift. His claws dug deeper into the armrests of his chair, his muscles tense as he watched the data streams on his display, unable to tear his gaze away. The readings showed nothing. No weapons powering up, no sudden movements. But his gut told him this wasn't the calm before a storm. It was the silence of something much more dangerous. Sir, their ship is moving towards us, the sensor officer said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. At a slow, steady pace. No acceleration, no evasive maneuvers. They're positioning themselves in the perfect line of attack. Veer could hear the trembling in the officer's voice, the fear that was creeping into the atmosphere of his own command ship. Fear wasn't something the Zinthari were used to. They were conquerors, warriors, rulers of vast stretches of space. But this was something new, something they had never encountered before. A ship that wasn't rushing toward them, but simply waiting, like a predator lying in wait for its prey to make the first move. "Weapon systems are online," the weapons officer announced, his voice laced with urgency. "We're prepared to fire whenever you give the order, Captain." Veer's mandibles clicked in a series of quick, sharp movements, his mind turning over the possibilities. The human ship had positioned itself directly between the sector's twin moons, almost as if it was saying, "This is my space now." They hadn't moved in to destroy or obliterate. They hadn't even made a single hostile action. But the fear they were sowing wasn't just from what they had done. It was from what they might do. This was about control, about testing the Dominion's resolve, about proving a point. And Veer knew in his bones that if they weren't careful, the consequences of underestimating this human presence could be disastrous. "Send the signal again," Veer commanded, his voice suddenly low and tense. "This time, make it clear. Tell them that they are trespassing. No more games. If they don't identify themselves now, we fire." He turned sharply to the communications officer. "Full power to the forward cannons. I want their ship to feel the weight of this threat." His officers nodded quickly, but there was an edge to their movements now, a nervous tension in their eyes. The crew of the Acts of Dominion had never felt like this before. They had been in countless battles, faced enemies from across the galaxy, and crushed those who opposed them with ruthless efficiency. But something about the calm demeanor of the human warship, its unflinching silence, was starting to gnaw at them. They had fought wars before, but never against humans like these. Something was different. Back aboard the Earth Forge, Mark 9, Commander Riker stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the looming mass of the Dominion fleet. He didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge the weapons system powering up, the ship preparing for the worst. He was calm, almost too calm. The ship's systems hummed around him, a soft, almost rhythmic sound that reminded him of the beat of a heart, steady, unyielding, and unafraid. He could feel the tension in the air, the hum of the ship's weapons, the flicker of enemy sensors on his own screens. The Dominion was preparing for a fight, but Riker wasn't worried. Not yet. "Lieutenant Sana," he said, without looking away from the viewport, "how are we looking on the stealth frigates?" Sana, standing near her station, glanced over at the display. Her brow furrowed slightly in concentration. "We're holding steady. The cloaks are active, and the jamming frequencies are in full effect. The Dominion doesn't realize we've got backup, not yet anyway. We're running silent." Riker nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Good. Keep them locked into our frequency. They'll need to stay distracted while we finish this." He turned to face his crew, his expression hardening. This isn't just about winning a battle. It's about sending a message. The Dominion thinks we're the weak ones, the quiet ones. They're about to find out what happens when they mess with humanity. Sana raised an eyebrow, but she didn't respond. There was no need for words at this point. They all understood what was at stake. The Dominion had made a grave mistake by assuming that humanity had forgotten how to fight, had forgotten what they were capable of. But Riker had come to this sector for a reason, and he wasn't about to leave until that reason was fulfilled. "Activate the relay," Riker said, his voice calm and steady. "Let's see how they react when we stop playing by their rules." He pressed a button on the armrest of his chair, and the ship's systems blinked as they processed his orders. All around the bridge, the crew moved with precision, ready for what was about to come. Meanwhile, the axe of Dominion continued to hover in space, waiting for the human ship to respond. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. The Dominion fleet was now fully aligned, their weapons locked and ready, each ship waiting for the signal to fire. Veer clenched his claws tighter, the tension building. He could feel the panic swelling around him, but he fought to keep it at bay. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when everything was hanging in the balance. "Captain," the sensor officer spoke up again, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong. Their ship is moving again." "Fire!" Veer shouted, his voice a growl of rage. "Now!" But the Earth Forge. Mark 9 wasn't making a rash move. It wasn't charging toward them, number. It was moving forward slowly, deliberately, as if testing the waters. The ship didn't accelerate to full speed. It simply crept forward, inch by inch, with quiet confidence. And as it did, something began to shift in the air. The Dominion fleet began to fall into disarray. "Sir," the weapons officer said, voice rising in alarm, "there's something else. Stealth frigates. A whole fleet of them just uncloaked behind us. We didn't detect them before." Veer's blood ran cold as he realized the true scope of the situation. It wasn't just the warship they were up against. There were more ships, more human vessels, all waiting to strike. The Dominion had been lured into a trap, and the walls were closing in fast. "Prepare for engagement," Veer screamed. But deep down, he knew it was already too late. The humans had anticipated everything, and now they were about to turn the tables. The panic that spread through the axe of Dominion was palpable. Veer's mind raced as his crew scrambled to react, but the inevitable feeling of doom hung over them. The Dominion fleet had been methodically maneuvered into position, but now it was clear they were facing far more than they had anticipated. The stealth frigates, perfectly hidden until this moment, now dropped out of their cloaks like ghosts emerging from the darkness. The sensors screamed as dozens of new signatures blinked into existence on the screens. "Get the shields up," Veer barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. He could hear the scrambling of officers, but the seconds stretched long, too long. His eyes darted from one officer to the next, sensing that they were all just as lost as he was. They had been caught flat-footed, and no amount of firepower could fix that. He clenched his mandibles, angry with himself for underestimating the humans. "Sir, the cloaked ships are moving into attack formation," the communications officer shouted. "They're positioning themselves to strike from all sides." Veer's eyes locked on the display, his heart racing. The humans weren't here to win by sheer force. They weren't even trying to overwhelm the Dominion with numbers. No, this was a strategy of precision. The stealth frigates were moving silently into place, each one locking onto a specific Dominion ship, positioning themselves in a way that suggested coordinated, planned execution. The Dominion fleet, in all its imposing might, was now facing an invisible enemy, with their communications jamming and their sensors nearly useless. "We're blind," one of the officers cried. "They've locked us out of the frequency bands. We can't communicate with each other." The horror of the situation began to settle into the crew's bones. Veer felt the weight of his command pressing down on him, as though the very walls of the ship were closing in. He was not a fool, and even in his fury, he could sense that the humans had outmaneuvered them at every turn. They hadn't just planned an attack, they had planned a message, and they were sending it with quiet, unyielding confidence. "We can't react fast enough, sir," the sensor officer screamed as more and more Dominion ships were marked for targeting. The once organized fleet was now in chaos. Destroyers, cruisers, and battleships all shifted into defensive maneuvers, but there was no cohesion, no leadership. The human ships had severed their connections to one another with ruthless efficiency, and now the once mighty Dominion fleet was left floundering, a collection of individual ships struggling to respond to a threat they couldn't see. "We need to act," Veer roared, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of frantic officers shouting out conflicting reports. His crew had no clear direction, and with every passing second, the human forces grew closer to their target. On the Earth. Forge. Mark 9, Riker watched the entire situation unfold on his own display. His fingers hovered lightly over the controls, not because he needed them, but because it helped him feel grounded in the moment. There was a strange calmness to everything. The Dominion fleet, once formidable and unyielding, was now struggling, and Riker knew exactly why. "They've already fallen apart," he said with a small smirk, leaning back in his chair. "They can't even talk to each other anymore." Sana glanced over at him, her expression unreadable. "They're panicking. It's too late for them to make a move without exposing themselves. They've lost all initiative." Riker nodded, his eyes tracing the flickering sensor readouts that confirmed the Dominion fleet was in full disarray. Ships were firing on each other in a frantic bid for control, but there was no focus to their movements. It was as though the humans had forced the entire fleet to descend into madness, one ship at a time. What had started as a bold strike had now become a full-scale psychological battle, and the Dominion had already lost. "We don't need to kill them all," Riker said quietly. "We just need to make sure they know who's in charge. Send the message, now." Sana paused for a moment, then nodded and typed something into the console. The transmission went out, cutting through the scrambling frequencies of the Dominion fleet. The words flashed across the screens of every ship in the area, a message to all who could hear. "Return the prisoners, or burn." The words were simple, cold, and calculated. They carried with them the weight of history, the weight of every betrayal, every skirmish, and every human who had been lost to the Dominion's cruelty. This wasn't a demand, it was a declaration. The Dominion would now have to answer for what they had done. On the axe of Dominion, Veer's claws dug into the armrest of his chair so deeply that they began to crack the metal. He stared at the transmission, at the words that had so easily pierced through their defenses. The fear that had taken root earlier now blossomed fully in his chest, like a cold, suffocating fog. He had expected a fight, but not this kind of fight. This was a war of minds, not weapons. The humans had outplayed them, and it had only just begun. "Sir!" The sensor officer's voice broke through the haze of panic. "There's something else. One of our destroyers. It just disappeared. Veer's breath caught in his throat. A destroyer? Just gone? No explosion, no warning, no trace. It simply vanished. His mind raced. This was no accident. This was no mistake. The humans had done this without even firing a shot. "Run the scans again," Veer commanded, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "How is this possible? Where did it go?" The crew scrambled to rerun the sensor scans, but the answer was clear even before they saw it. The Dominion destroyer had been wiped from existence, erased by some unseen force. Fear seized Veer's heart, and his claws began to tremble with a mixture of rage and dread. The humans weren't just sending a message. They were erasing their enemies from the very fabric of space. "What did they do?" Veer whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "On the Earth Forge." Mark 9, Riker didn't even flinch. He knew exactly what was happening. It was a warning shot, nothing more. The humans weren't here to destroy. They were here to remind. They had been silent for too long, too passive in the eyes of the galaxy. But now, they were speaking. And the Dominion was listening. "We've broken through their communications," Riker said, leaning forward in his chair. "They know we're serious now. They're scared, and it's only just starting." Sana looked over at him, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. "They've finally realized who they're dealing with." Riker's gaze hardened as he turned to face the viewport once more, his expression set. "Good. Let them be scared. It's time for them to remember why they've been so quiet about us for so long." The Earth Forge. Mark 9 loomed like a predator in the dark, a shadow that drifted steadily toward its prey, its systems humming with quiet power. Outside, the Dominion fleet was descending into chaos, and yet the human warship moved with precision, calmness, and purpose. It was as if it knew exactly how to break the Dominion without lifting a finger. All it took was a few well-placed moves, a few words, and a well-timed strike. The Earth Forge had already shown them what silence could do. "Commander, their fleet is falling back," Sana reported, her voice calm, almost in disbelief. "They're retreating. The destroyers, two more, just vanished." Riker's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Let them run. They're too late to stop what's already happened." Veer's fleet was scattering like a storm broken by an unstoppable wind. Ships moved in every direction, each trying to find a way to escape the invisible assault. The humans weren't fighting with bombs and lasers, not yet. They were fighting with fear, with a cold reminder of what humanity was capable of. And that reminder was enough to unravel even the most battle-hardened empire. But the Dominion wasn't completely broken. As the remaining ships moved into disarray, a voice rang out across the communication channels, an order that no one could ignore. "This is High Imperator Threx Solari. We will not run. We will fight to the last." The voice was cold, steady, but there was an undercurrent of desperation. "Prepare to engage the Earth Forge Mark 9 with everything we have. We cannot allow this to continue." Veer turned toward the comms officer, his eyes sharp. "This is it. We stand and fight. If we let them go now, if we let them escape without facing us, everything we've built here will be meaningless." The crew of the Axe of Dominion readied themselves for the final clash. Their cannons powered up, shields flickered to life, and the enormous fleet began to focus all its energy on the single target before them, the Earth Forge Mark 9. The time for subtlety was over. Now, it was all about destruction. But Riker was prepared for this moment. He had expected the Dominion to regroup and attempt a counterattack. This was exactly what he wanted. The message had been delivered. Now, it was time to finish it. "Sana, light them up," he said, his voice steady as ever. "But don't destroy them. Not yet." Sana didn't question the order. She simply nodded, her fingers flying over her console as the energy beams from the human warship's weapon systems began to charge. The sky above them lit up with the soft blue hum of the weaponry, not in explosive violence, but in calculated bursts that hit the Dominion fleet's weaker points, their engines, their weapons arrays. The energy was precise, crippling their ships without completely obliterating them. "We're sending them a message," Riker said, his voice cold and steady. "This is how you crush an empire, without ever firing a shot. We're not here to destroy. We're here to remind." Outside, the Dominion ships shuddered as their systems began to fail one by one. Some attempted to fire back, but their weapons misfired, their energy reserves depleted by the pinpoint strikes from the human warship. Their fleets were scattered, crippled, and in disarray. The Earth Forge. Mark IX was untouchable, a force of nature that had arrived when the Dominion least expected it. And then, the final blow came, but not from weapons. The Earth Forge. Mark IX moved closer to the axe of Dominion, slowly, almost ceremoniously. As it did, the crew of the Dominion flagship saw something they couldn't believe. The human warship wasn't firing any more shots. It was just waiting. And in that waiting, in that silence, the Dominion fleet understood. The fight had already been lost. The humans hadn't needed to win through firepower. They had already conquered the battle of wills. Ver's heart sank. They hadn't defeated them with sheer force. The humans had won by reminding the Dominion of the one thing that the Empire had always feared, that the humans, when pushed too far, would not hesitate to burn everything to the ground. "Message sent," Sana said from the bridge. "All Dominion ships are now out of commission. Their fleet is crippled. It's over, Commander." Riker stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes tracing the movement of the retreating fleet. There was no triumph in his expression, no victory dance. This was just the price of peace. The Earth Forge Mark IX wasn't here to conquer. They weren't here to reign supreme. They were here to remind the galaxy of what happened when humanity's patience ran out. "Prepare to send the final message," Riker said, his voice firm. He turned to face the crew, the weight of his words heavy. "Send this to the entire Dominion command, unencrypted. Return the prisoners or burn. You chose. And now you will learn what happens when you forget what we are capable of." The communication officer nodded and initiated the transmission. The words would echo through the Dominion's command center, their control system, and every ship in the fleet. The message was clear. The humans were no longer a forgotten species. They were a force to be reckoned with. And as the transmission went out, Riker couldn't help but wonder if the Dominion would ever fully understand the true meaning of that message. Would they ever comprehend what they had awakened in the humans? The Earth Forge. Mark IX drifted away from the shattered remnants of the Dominion fleet, its mission complete. There were still 1,000 battles left to fight, but for now, the message had been delivered. The galaxy had been reminded that humanity was not weak. Humanity was not a peace-loving species that could be crushed underfoot. Humanity was a species of survivors, warriors, and strategists. And when the time came, humanity would rise.